Welcome to the deep dive. We dig into those complex stories, the ones with lots of layers, and try to give you the core insight, cut through the noise. Today, we're tackling a really dramatic situation. It involves international deportation, disputed criminal charges, claims of arbitrary detention, and a pretty desperate protest. It was all playing out thousands of miles from the U.S. Yeah, our focus is on one man, Roberto Mosquera del Peral. He's 58, Cuban, deported from the U.S. earlier this year. And right now, he's being held in a maximum security prison, not just anywhere, but in Eswatini. That's the southern African nation formerly called Swaziland. The urgency here is that since October 15th, he's been on a hunger strike, protesting his detention.
And it's important right from the start to see this isn't just some isolated event. When you connect the dots, looking at the wider U.S. policy picture, Mosquera del Peral's case seems like a direct outcome of this ramp up in third country removals. This policy really picked up steam under the previous administration's immigration crackdown. It often targeted people who, well, couldn't easily be deported back home, like to Cuba, because of diplomatic tangles. The really fundamental complexity here, the thing that should make you pause, is the location and the legal footing. Or maybe the lack of it. He wasn't sent back to Cuba. He was sent to Eswatini, a country where, as far as we know, he has no ties, no family, no citizenship. These removals have been purely based on agreements between governments.
Okay, let's unpack that a bit. The logistics, the scale. Because Eswatini, that feels like a really unusual destination for someone deported from the U.S. He was apparently part of an initial group, 5 third country nationals sent there back in July. But our sources show it didn't stop there. Another 10 were deported there in October. So we're looking at, at least 15 men caught in this policy pipeline to southern Africa.
And you really have to stress where they're being kept. This isn't some immigration holding center. No, it's a maximum security prison in Eswatini. And this happened right after the U.S. presidential administration pushed for a tougher stance on immigration. The clash started almost immediately. You had U.S. officials on one side, the detainees' lawyers on the other.
Right. So the U.S. side says these men are convicted criminals. That's the justification, basically public safety. But the lawyers fired back straight away. They argued, look, all these guys, they already finished their U.S. sentences. Their point is there's just no legal basis to imprison them again in Eswatini.
And that is the absolute core legal question hanging over everything. Did they serve their time, pay their debt, or are they somehow still liable for potentially indefinite imprisonment somewhere else because of how serious the original crime was? It really shines a light on the risks in these third country deals. It kind of allows the U.S. to, transfer the person and maybe transfer the legal ambiguity right along with them.
Okay, let's dive into that ambiguity, the disputed criminal history. Let's look at the U.S. narrative first. The Department of Homeland Security, DHS, they posted on X, that's Twitter, back in June, about Mosquera del Peral specifically. They confirmed his arrest by immigration in Miami. And the convictions DHS listed were very serious. Homicide, aggravated assault on a police officer, aggravated battery.
That narrative paints a picture, doesn't it? Dangerous individual, removal justified. But here's where the legal details really matter. And this brings in the defense's counter-argument. We have to mention Alma David. She's Mosquera del Peral's attorney based in the U.S. And she directly disputes what DHS put out there.
And this seems crucial. Attorney David says the DHS claim of homicide, that's just wrong, factually incorrect. She states, based on the record she has, he was convicted of attempted murder, not murder.
And that difference, attempted murder versus homicide, legally, politically, it's huge. Think about it. If a government agency like DHS is trying to justify a really controversial policy, like sending someone to a max security prison in a third country, using the absolute heaviest charge, homicide, gives them the most cover. It lets them frame it as removing a murderer, someone who's an ultimate threat, even if the sentence was technically done.
So if it was attempted murder, how does that impact the reason for holding him now in Eswatini?
Well, it changes the whole framing around arbitrary detention, potentially. The attorney's main point remains. Whether it was attempted murder or homicide, her client finished his U.S. sentence before deportation. Normally, finishing a sentence in the U.S. means, well, you've paid your debt. But deporting him to Eswatini seems to have transferred the person, but maybe not the legal finality of that completed sentence. So if Eswatini is holding him based on that top charge, homicide, which DHS alleged, they might be working off a false premise about his current risk level. Or if they're holding him because they're sort of reevaluating the severity of the attempted murder even after the U.S. sentence was served, well, that creates a massive potential loophole. It suggests the U.S. found a country may be willing to detain men who might be legally free in the U.S. simply by emphasizing the original charge's threat level. That distinction, homicide versus attempted murder, that's the whole pivot point for whether his current imprisonment is justified.
Which then leads to a big policy question, doesn't it? If these men really did finish their sentences, why would Eswatini agree to hold them in a maximum security prison, no less, halfway across the world? What's in it for them? What's the deal?
That's the real question behind the scenes, isn't it? Our sources don't spell out the exact agreement terms, but generally these third country removal deals often involve significant incentives, maybe economic aid, maybe diplomatic brownie points. Eswatini is a smaller, landlocked nation. Taking on politically complicated deportees from a superpower like the U.S., that often comes with benefits. Development aid, better trade terms, financial assistance, things like that. They're essentially taking on the legal and political headache in exchange for something else.
So it starts to feel less about imminent danger and maybe more about, well, bureaucratic convenience. The U.S. had trouble sending people back to Cuba, so they found somewhere else willing to take them. But that bureaucratic solution has now become a human crisis. Which brings us to the current situation, the desperation. It seems like when the legal avenues felt blocked, the only option left was protest. And that's what Mosquera del Peral did, starting this hunger strike on October 15th. Attorney David's words on this are pretty stark, she said quite clearly. My client is arbitrarily detained, and now his life is on the line.
Yeah, that quote really captures the shift, doesn't it? From a legal fight to a life or death situation. A hunger strike, especially in a maximum security prison so far from home, without easy access to legal help, it's an act of sheer desperation. And running parallel to this is the legal nightmare happening inside Eswatini. There's a local lawyer there working for the deportees who's apparently locked in a legal fight just to get basic access to these men. The sources say the Eswatini government has, quote, so far refused. That refusal is the critical blockage right now. Without access, the lawyer can't formally challenge the detention, can't check on their condition, and critically, can't monitor Mosquera del Peral's health during this hunger strike.
And Attorney David, back in the U.S., she's been very public about her demands. Specifically, that Mosquera del Peral must be allowed to see his lawyer in Eswatini now. But the response from Eswatini seems limited. A spokesperson for the Correctional Services reportedly gave no immediate comment, just said they'd review the information. Review the information isn't the same as granting access, especially not quickly. And like you said, with a hunger strike in a maximum security setting and disputed legal status, time is absolutely critical. Basic legal representation needs to happen before this health crisis gets worse.
Precisely. That refusal of access, that's what really elevates this from a complex legal puzzle to an immediate human rights issue. It raises huge questions about accountability in these third country deals. If the U.S. sends the person, do they also send the legal safeguards required by international human rights law? What seems to be happening here, based on the sources, is maybe not. These men appear to be caught in a kind of legal black hole.
Okay, so let's bring this together for you, the listener, trying to make sense of it all. Let's recap the core tension. You have this group of men, deported under a U.S. policy push, sent to a third country, Eswatini. They're now in a maximum security prison there. Their lawyers are making a powerful argument they already served their sentences in the U.S. There's no legal ground to keep holding them.
And crucially, you have these two clashing stories about the crimes justifying it all. DHS saying homicide, the lawyer saying attempted murder. That difference really underscores how much weight language carries, how framing can shape a policy with life and death consequences.
This whole situation just throws into sharp relief how complicated accountability gets with these third country removal cases. If the U.S. justification for deporting them is factually challenged, and then the country they're sent to denies them access to lawyers, what options does someone have? Especially when they feel forced into something as extreme as a hunger strike.
Right. And this leads to a final, quite troubling thought for you to consider. What does this case really tell us about the legal gray zones that open up when countries deport people to nations where they have zero connection, no family, no citizenship ties? When a powerful nation uses a policy that effectively takes someone out of its own legal system's reach, and the receiving nation then puts them beyond the reach of local legal help, where does the responsibility for their basic rights and safety actually land? It's like the legal safety net just disappears beneath them. Their fate ends up entirely in the hands of prison officials thousands of miles away. Something to think about.